Let's talk a little bit about the various types of HTML form inputs that we can use within our pages and within our applications. In previous lessons, we've only looked at the type equals text type of form input, but I want to show you various types of different inputs that you can use within your applications. And this is one of those topics that we'll kind of touch on and we'll point you in a specific direction here and there, but in general, we're not going to dive deeply into the details of all these inputs or the various ways in which you can use them. There are attributes and various use cases beyond what we'll look at here, but we want to give you enough to sort of feel your way around as you're new to this stuff. So let's look at this particular page. I just created a page with various types of form elements in it. These top three are all HTML input elements that have the various types: type equals text, type equals password, and type equals email. We've already seen type equals text. This is just a free form text box. I can type anything I want in there. Type equals password is going to go ahead and mask anything that I type. So that's a useful feature if you have a password field. Obviously, if someone were to type in there and someone were to be able to look over your shoulder, they would see your password, which you don't want. So using type equals password for any field really that can contain that sensitive information will be useful. The type equals email field is going to give us a little bit of extra validation. So if I just typed in something here and click away, and if that thing is not a properly formatted email, I'll get this browser specific behavior. Here it's highlighting in red with the message, please enter an email address, right? That's useful. And as long as I enter in something that looks vaguely like an email address, it's probably going to validate that just fine. So there are various types of form validation. Using HTML attributes is one level of validation. We'll talk about the other types of validation in a future lesson. So let's look at the markup for this file. Here in inputs.html, I've just structured this markup, and you can see that here I have these first three inputs are type equals text, type equals password, and type equals email. And notice too, I've used a different sort of labeling scheme here or approach from the last lesson that we talked about labels in. Before, I showed you how to use labels with the for attribute, right? And that would be, you would have to put a string here that matched the ID of an input element. You can get the same effect in terms of attaching a label to an input element by wrapping that input element with the label. So here, notice that the input element is inside of the label tags. And that gives us the same effect of when I click on the label, it focuses the input element. So those are the three types of inputs at the top. We have some more inputs down below. I have some checkboxes right here, and I've named these CB1, CB2, and I've given them these labels. So let's go ahead and look at how checkboxes work. You can click on the name as long as that name is in a label tag attached to the element, and it will toggle that checkbox on and off. Notice that these are independent, right? So that's in difference to the way that radio buttons work. So radio buttons and checkboxes are similar but different. So below these checkboxes, I have a set of 3 radio buttons. And notice that if I click on the radio buttons, they toggle. So if I click, I can only have one of the radio buttons in a specific radio group turned on at any point in time, while checkboxes are all independent. I can have any number of them turned on or off at any point in time. For this to work, however, with radio buttons, I need to have their names properly matched. So here I've intentionally misnamed one of these. You can see that these two are linked, and that when I click one, the other one goes off. However, that does not affect the third one, the large radio button, and let's see why. That's because when I go in here and look at the names that are attached to these input elements, these two have the same name, and this one has a differing name. So the third one that's associated with the large label has a different name. Let me go ahead and fix that and show you that now when I do this, that is part of the radio group. So radio buttons form a radio group with the given name. So the two types we've been looking at here are type equals checkbox, type equals radio, and these are going to form a single input group, whereas the checkboxes will be independent inputs. Okay, let's look at a couple more input types here. This one is the first one we've seen that doesn't have the input tag. This is a text area. And a text area, you've seen this before, is just an area for entering larger text. By default, without any additional styling, it's going to look like this. but it gives you the ability to open it up and expand and just type lots and lots of text. So that can be useful, and then usually if you're going to use this, you would want to apply some CSS to make that look decent. But it's just an input that allows you to apply multiple lines of text, basically. And then finally, the last element that we have that is also not of input type is a select. And so the select here is a dropdown. Let's just look at how it works. I have the select and I have a dropdown with various values in there, various cities. And the select itself is built up by using the select tags, and within the select tags, I give it each option its own option tag. Okay, and so we see the various options provided here. So those are the inputs and the way they're built up. I want to show you now how the names work, the name attributes work, and the value attributes work with these inputs in an actual application. So what I'm going to do now is close this out. I've actually put this code in a Python file in a Flask application. And so we can see this is the same markup as we saw on the last, let's fix that there, the same markup we saw in that HTML file. And so I have a handler that's going to just display that form, which is pretty much what we just saw over here in the static HTML file. And then I have another handler that's going to handle the posting of that form. And what it's going to do is basically just loop through each of the fields in the request, basically each of the form inputs, and just print out the name and value of each of them, so we can just kind of get a sense for how these form elements generate data that's then posted to the server. So let me go ahead and start this up. Let's see, we're in the right place. I've got my environment activated, so I can say python main.py. Okay. And we go to our browser and type in localhost 5000, and let's see what I named this particular route. So this form is available at /form inputs. So let's go there. Okay, so we see again basically the same form. This time though, it was rendered via the Flask response. So let's put some data in each of these, and let's see what happens. So type equals text. And let's select ketchup and mustard, and then I'll select one of these three. Some text. I don't really know what to put here. Let me just see what's in my clipboard. See if I can find something that has a bunch of different stuff in it. That's like a decent chunk. And then I'll select a city. Okay, so what just happened there? Well, one thing is that, let me go back. I actually inserted something in there in that text area that probably shouldn't have really been used for this example because it contains some markup, which broke stuff. Let me go get a different example. Markup there too. Let me find one without markup. That one should work. Okay. There we go. All right, so what happened here? So the Flask handler, the request handler that processes this form down here, notice that it's set up at the same URL to handle post requests. Our form was posting. Notice that it just loops over request.form.keys. So recall that request.form will contain all of the data passed to the server in the body of a post request. So I'm just looping over each of those, and then I'm using the string.format to generate a new line with the key value pair for each of those pieces of data that's passed to the server and returning that as a response. So basically what I get when I see this form submission data is just the exact values that were passed to the form. So these are the things that we typed in a moment ago for user name, user password, user email. And let's just look at how these guys, notice that these are the values of the keys that were used to retrieve that form data out of the request. So request.form, and then I would use the names of the keys to pull that out. And so these correspond to, as we learned before, the name attributes on those inputs, okay? There's something worth noting though. If you were to look at, say, this one, this was the result of the radio selection that we made. So if we look at the radio group, notice that they all have the same name. So we saw that we had to create a radio group using the name attribute on each element such that they were the same on each element so that the toggling would work. But that also means that only one piece of data for that radio group can actually be sent to the server. So that one name is going to be the piece of data that, the key for the piece of data that's sent. With the text area, name works the same way as it does for our text inputs. And for the select, it's the same as well. One thing to note, look at this particular element here. We did not see any input. I didn't type, any numbers within my form when I submitted it. So where did this particular piece of data come from? Well, we kind of glossed over it. If you were sharp, you might have noticed us scrolling past it a few times. But there's an input here that has type equals hidden. So this is a special input type that you can use to basically store a piece of data within a form that you want your application to know about, but the user should not be able to enter or edit. So by saying type equals hidden, you make that input part of the form, but the user will not be able to see it or to edit it. And the value attribute is then used to store the value of that. So often what happens with these type equals hidden attributes is they're used to store some piece of application specific data, or they're sometimes set by JavaScript within the page so that, the code within the page might be messing with this, but the user themselves are not touching this particular input. All right, so let's see. Let's go ahead and notice that we've used the value attribute in several places, right? So there's value equals first CB for checkbox, and then value equals second CB, and those were used here to specify the value of the data that was submitted for those two checkboxes, right? So when I have something like a radio group or checkboxes, I can specify the value. Let's look at what happens if I don't specify the value. Let me just take this off this one. So now my first checkbox does not have a value. And let's go back and let's resubmit. I need to refresh. There we go. So if I don't submit the value, it'll just tell me whether or not that checkbox is on. If I go back and uncheck it, I just don't get that particular value. I don't get CB1 : off. If the checkbox is not checked, that piece of data just isn't part of the submitted form data. Okay, so that's how values work with respect to checkboxes. Similarly with radio groups. And then within the select, the value is again used to determine the piece of data that's posted to the server. So I selected Seattle in my form submission, but notice over here I got the abbreviation SEA, and that is because of the value attribute that is part of that option tag. So here I have to put the value on the option tag to specify each individual value that goes with each individual option. Okay, so there are a lot of ways you can use form input elements beyond this. There are lots of different attributes, and we'll encounter a few of them as we go. We're not going to kind of cover things in a comprehensive way, but we did want to show you the sort of basic components of the most common form elements so that you can use them in our examples and in our applications as we learn.